Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the University of Toronto Mississauga's webinar entitled Psychological Trauma and Cybercrime. So my name is Ben Jones. I'm an Alumni Relations Officer at UTM, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to tonight's presentation. Although this event takes place online, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I also want to briefly acknowledge the continued struggle of Indigenous peoples here in Canada and around the world to not only acknowledge the Indigenous homelands as we do here today, but to stand beside Indigenous peoples as they assert their right to live on those lands in safety, with autonomy, and without fear of persecution. I encourage us all to bring action into our allyship and to speak out for equality and an end to violence. Today, we have alumni and friends from all over the world joining us, from India, Nigeria, Hong Kong, Australia, Scotland, Germany, Italy, Guyana, Singapore, Indonesia, the UK, the Netherlands, Colombia, Spain, and across Canada and the United States. Welcome to everyone attending around the world. Following this presentation, there will be a moderated question and answer period, and we encourage you to submit questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you're having technical difficulties, please use the chat function. There's a button there as well, and one of our staff will be there to assist you through private messages. Today, I'm delighted to introduce our two co-presenters. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Associate Professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the Temerty Faculty of Medicine, University of Toronto, Dr. Katy Kamkar. Dr. Katy is an award-winning clinical psychologist with international recognition. She has been working at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto for close to 17 years. Most recently, she has been appointed as Federal Associate Ombudsman, Mental Health and Executive Advisor to the Deputy Minister on Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at Public Services and Procurement Canada. The mandate of the Office of the Ombudsman for Mental Health is to cultivate a healthy and productive workplace, free of mental health stigma, by delivering independent, confidential, impartial, and professional services to employees, managers, and executives, facing workplace issues. Dr. Kamkar has received numerous awards and recognitions for her contributions in the field of mental health and community service, and I know that her expertise will serve us well in the conversation today. Welcome, Professor Kamkar. Next, I would like to welcome our second co-presenter, UTM alumnus and cybersecurity expert, Ryan Duquette. Ryan is MNP's National Leader for Digital Forensics with the firm's Forensics and Litigation Support Service Group in Toronto. With more than 2 decades of digital forensics investigations and cybersecurity experience, he provides clients with litigation support as well as cyber incident responses, fraud matters, and technology risks. As a former police officer focusing on cybercrime and fraud matters, Ryan works closely with his clients to investigate workplace incidents and civil litigation concerns, including intellectual property theft, human resources investigations, and data breaches. Ryan is a highly experienced digital forensic analysis, digital investigations, and cybersecurity. He is specialized in criminal and civil investigations and deemed an expert witness in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice and the Ontario Court of Justice for the identification, preservation, collection, analysis, and presentation of electronic evidence. Welcome also to Ryan. I'm just going to see if I can get their screens. There they are. Without further ado, it's all yours. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Ben, for the kind introductions. It's a pleasure to be here today. Both Dr. Kamkar and myself are proud supporters of University of Toronto. So it's a pleasure, absolute pleasure to be here today. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and get things going here. So, okay, so on a typical day, Janet's workday was very challenging and stressful, but today was off the charts. Not only was she preparing for her organization's year-end financials, but due to COVID-19, her company went completely remote and she was now working from home. Imagine the frustration when she received an email out of the blue from Robert, her CEO, basically demanding a payment that should be made to a new vendor. At least in the email, Robert had asked how her 3 kids were doing, trying quickly to just get this task off her plate she followed the somewhat unusual payment instructions Robert had given her and sent $275,000 payment to the vendor. It wasn't until 2 days later that it was discovered that this vendor didn't actually exist, and the entire payment was gone without a trace. Janet and her organization realized at that moment that they had fallen victim to a cyber attack. Janet, thinking back to the email, did think the request and the instructions were a little odd, but her CEO did include personal information about her, which made it seem completely legit. It looked so real. How was she to know? Shortly after this event, unfortunately, Janet was fired from her role. So welcome to Psychological Trauma and Cybercrime. Again, it's a pleasure to be here today with my good friend, Dr. Katy Kamkar, and from the University of Toronto, and I am Ryan Duquette from MNP. Today, we're going to be jumping around a little bit. I'm going to start the presentation with a little bit of an introduction to cybercrime itself, basically what that is, talking a little bit about some of the common scams that are out there, and human error. And then Dr. Kamkar is going to jump in and talk about the impact of cybercrime on your mental health and coping strategies. And then I'm going to come back at the end and talk a little bit about cybercrime prevention, because hopefully at the end of the day, we don't want any of you on this call to fall victim to any sort of cyber scam or cybercrime. Unfortunately, that happens. This is a screen of the top 10 frauds based on the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre annual report from 2022, so just last year. And it's interesting, I've been watching the stats move around, right, over the years, and more of these are, digital related or cybercrime related. They occur over your computer. Cybercrime has been around for some time, but studies did show that during the COVID pandemic, rates of cybercrime rose 300%. Cybercriminals prey on the fact that many were working from home, distracted, and using psychological tactics such as placing urgency and risk to the employee. Within phishing attacks, they prey on our vulnerabilities and convince people to follow their instructions. And this happens all the time, unfortunately. We're going to get into a few examples later on about some of these scams on this list here, and some of the clients that I'm actually dealing with who have unfortunately fallen victim to cyber scams. But you can see here that a lot of these, like I mentioned, are internet-based investigations. The example that I mentioned at the beginning was more of an organizational perspective, and organizations deploy all the latest, greatest tools out there, firewalls, encryption, and whatnot. And, but in the right corner, you can see there is human error. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Scams and cybercrimes, such as the ones we saw on the last screen, happen on almost a daily basis across the country and the world. And imagine costing, your organization or your company lots of money because you accidentally type, the organizational's banking details into a fake online form or an email that somebody is masquerading as a vendor. Imagine you click on that email attachment and your entire network and company data gets encrypted with ransomware, and your organization not only has to pay to decrypt the data, but your organization suffers massive financial losses due to the time the operations were impacted. So a lot of these cybersecurity breaches are due to human error. We're not going to dive too deep today into organizational cybercrime. I really wanted to focus this talk on you and individual scams and individual cyber scams that are out there. So we're going to dive a little bit more into those. Two of them that I mentioned, I'm actually dealing with two clients right now. The first one that we've seen sort of popping up again is an online dating scam. We are assisting a client of ours who unfortunately fell for an online dating scam, and it was above $1 million that was lost. And that is quite significant. One of the largest ones that I've seen in a long time. Online dating is not new, but the ways in which nefarious individuals have, taken advantage of opportunities over the web is growing. And romance scams involve feigning romantic attention towards a victim to get their attention and trust before using that favor to request money from the victim. These types of scams often turn into various other types of scams, including investment or emergency scams, identity theft, amongst others. The other one that we're dealing with, like I mentioned, the romance scams can turn into an investment scam. We are assisting another client. It was around a $280,000 scam, still a significant amount of money. Investment scams might look a little bit different, but each involve an individual promising significant return on a certain company or an initiative that the victim has to then get a one-time payment or whatnot to invest in, right? So we have to be very, very careful for this. They may request money up front as part of their investment scam and whatnot. So we're starting to see a lot more victims starting to fall, unfortunately, victim to these scams. That last scam that I mentioned was so prevalent that actually the Hamilton police, this was from I think it was a Toronto Star article or a Hamilton Spectator article. And Hamilton police actually sounded an alarm over this crypto investment scam. It was almost word for word the same scam that unfortunately our client fell victim to. And you can see that this was only a few weeks ago that this alarm came out. So you can look this up online, and it walks you through basically how this scam occurs. It's very multifaceted, with an initial investment that goes sour, and then a investigative company that comes swooping in to save the day, and you can get all of your investment money out. But it's going to cost you money to do that, unfortunately. So lots of information in that article. Okay, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Kamkar now to talk a little bit about the trauma if you do happen to fall victim to one of these scams. Dr. Kamkar, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you so much, dear Ryan. And it is such an honor again for us to be with all of you. Thank you for having us. And these are great examples that Ryan has used. And really, why even we are talking about this, it has a tremendous impact on our health. Here, of course, I'm going to talk about the impact of cybercrime on mental health, but health is health, whether we are talking about our mental health or our physical health. So here, as Ryan just mentioned, the cyber attacks, the cyber scams, the cybercrime can come into a variety of forms, whether we are talking about phishing attacks, ransomware attacks, romantic scams, and so on and so forth. These are all associated with the different types of losses. Every time we're talking about a loss, then we are also talking about grief. So here, losses in terms of, as Ryan again just mentioned, it could be in relation to our finances, our employment. It could be, of course, data losses, and of course, different types of in relation to our personal life losses. And depending on the severity of it, then the devastation can also be very significant here as well. Most importantly, it can lead to a host of feelings, feeling helpless, feeling powerless. If we look at anxiety, some of the key features of anxiety include feelings of helplessness, or I feel I'm out of control, I feel powerless. And that would then just drive even more any person in this situation, very sad situation, to feel even more anxious. So the psychological impact here can vary depending on, as we just talked about, the type of the cybercrime, the severity of the attack, the person's reaction to it, but then also the person's personal characteristics and circumstances. And so the emotional and the psychological impact following those losses can range from mild to severe, and of course be associated with a host of symptoms: depression, anxiety. Anxiety can lead to panic, anxiety attacks, and at times, of course, even symptoms related to post-traumatic stress disorder and to even suicide. And the mental health conditions are often, as we see very often, exacerbated because, again, of those psychosocial losses. So related to finances, it could be also people's home, people's family, the relationships, and those employment. Most importantly as well, often what people experience is the lack of trust. Not only in terms of lack of trust to the person, or it could be to the system or to others, but also in terms of lack of trust when it comes to themselves. And this in and of itself also becomes a primary grief. So as we just talked about here again, fear and anxiety, which are very prominent emotions. Often people fear a sense of concern for their safety, sense of fear, anxiety, and it could be, again, going into anything, approaching anything online, but it can also quickly generalize as well in terms of anything else they might have to do or they might have to purchase. Sometimes examples that often I hear, it would be even going to the bank to just withdraw money, or going to the grocery store and need to use the credit card. So a lot of this feeling of helplessness here, and the despair and the vulnerability that sets in. Other very often common reactions, of course, are the feelings of anger, feelings of frustration, but then also shame and embarrassment. And these are paralyzing emotions, because often we hear about anxiety and fear. Anxiety and fear are emotions related to when there is an external threat. But shame, embarrassment, and guilt are often what we talk about private emotions. These are more self-conscious emotions. Guilt is a negative evaluation of my behavior. Shame is a negative evaluation of myself. So those emotions on their own can become so powerful and paralyzing. And it can lead to the person feeling withdrawn. They want to isolate. Then, of course, it could further drive depression. They're embarrassed to talk to anyone. There is reduced interest in activities, and so on and so forth. And we can just then appreciate here how slowly it can have this devastation on the person's functioning, personal, social, academic, or occupational functioning. Just again, as we talked about, a variety of consequences and losses in terms of the finances and the professional life as well. And as I have mentioned a bit earlier, symptoms related to post-traumatic stress. Again, depending on the nature of the crime, a reaction to the crime and the severity and the circumstances, but victims can at times, of course, develop symptoms of PTSD, including having flashbacks, nightmares, so bad dreams, feeling again helpless, and engage in a host of avoidant behaviors. It could be maybe not being able to buy anything anymore, talk to someone, or trust anymore, anyone, difficulty having trusting relationships. So all those can gradually then impact the quality of life, their well-being. As we just talked about, the losses, I think this is probably the most powerful in terms of all the different types of losses we talked about, but then also when it comes to the self, people often report, and it is the case, that they feel that their private life, their sense of self, their identity has been robbed from them. And so this grief can then in turn translate into a host of emotions: denial, anger, depression, anxiety, and there is no set order. People can experience all of them. People might experience one of them. It could be a denial and anger, or it could just be depression, and then going back to the denial and anger. So for everyone, it could be very different and a unique experience. So just here, taken all together, it's always helpful to appreciate the wholesome approach, the impact on us emotionally, cognitively, behaviorally, but then also physiologically. As we just talked about, the emotional symptoms, a host of emotions, feeling depressed, demoralized, sadness, feeling blue, mood irritability, our mood fluctuates, anxiety, guilt, feeling ashamed. Cognitively, again, we might doubt the self, we might doubt others, we might feel I'm weak. Again, the self feels shattered, the self becomes shattered. So we feel a sense of failure, the lack of self-confidence, there's a reduced sense of self, reduced sense of self-esteem. Our behavioral changes, as I had mentioned earlier, more withdrawn, self-isolation. We might engage again. We might engage in also at times, we know as individuals, when we might be confronted with a stressor, life adversity, sometimes again, we might engage in unhealthy coping. It could be substance misuse. We might engage in more avoidance behaviors that might not, again, help maybe our everyday life functioning, our work or our academic or personal life functioning. Differences and disturbance in our sleep, appetite changes, concentration changes, and of course, all those physiological symptoms that we might go through. Headache, often people report muscle tension, especially pain around the shoulder and the neck area, abdominal distress, and again, changes in our sleep and eating. So it could be eating more, eating less, sleeping more, sleeping less, and etc. So it's always appreciating the wholesome approach in terms of the impact. Thank you, dear Ryan. So then here, I know dear Ryan will also talk about some tips and strategies for us to cope. But here, starting here with the individual, really recognizing, first of all, identifying a range of thoughts, a range of emotions and our reactions, and realizing that you're not alone. If you were alone, we would not even be having this talk. Ryan went through a range of examples. So clearly you're not alone. So realizing these are normal reactions and you're not alone. If we feel we are alone, we are going to become more isolated and the reactions are going to become even more intense. Normalizing the reactions. The second thing here is that always I say to everyone, we always need to be identifying what are our positives and our protective factors, and always around also protecting our protective factors. So reminding themselves of what are my positives, my qualities and my achievements, because whoever has done that has not taken everything. So I have, these are my positives, these are my qualities and achievement, despite the severe losses here from the cybercrime. And of course, the feeling of being betrayed and robbed. Then practicing self-care. Self-care is all of those are self-care. But of course, as we know, in terms of any proper sleep hygiene, healthy diet, exercises are key fuels that our body needs. We continuously also reframing our thoughts. How can I put my thoughts into perspective? That not only the negative, but and also the neutral and the positive. So how can I balance my thoughts? And also gradually setting meaningful activities. If it's very hard, if it's 0 now, starting with 1. I always say to everyone, anything above 0 does count. Avoiding self-blame. It's about, often we put our time and energy into self-criticism, blaming the self. But it's really here when we talk about self-compassion. Self-compassion comes with the relationship with the self during difficult time. And it's by, as we just talked about, identifying thoughts and my emotions, but being able to step back so that we can put them into perspective. Part of self-compassion is also practicing self-kindness. The more we are able to practice self-kindness, and reducing the judgment towards the self, we can actually also better than being kind with others too. And self-compassion also comes with humanity, knowing that we are human beings. We make errors, we make mistakes. Do I want to learn from the past for better today and future? Yes. Do I want to learn from the past in terms of what helped me? Yes. Do I want to learn from the past in terms of what did not help me? Yes, but not to the point of dwelling and ruminating, but in a way that will be constructive feedback for myself, constructive learning. Often people say, well, I don't deserve self-compassion. Well, self-compassion is the only way we can actually improve and move forward. Self-compassion demands having a realistic evaluation of the self. Ensuring that the way I evaluate myself, the way I assess myself is actually based on who I am today. If we view the self in a very negative light, then I'm going to remove myself from reality. Then if I'm not connected with reality, how can I improve? Similarly, if I view myself in a very positive, glowy way, I might again remove myself from reality. So the best way we can all, as we say, experience growth, that growth mindset we talk about. So psychological growth, emotional growth, our professional growth, our personal growth is having a realistic view of myself. And that comes with the self-compassion and the self-kindness. And of course, maximizing our resources, our services, our strength, and that's the foundation of resiliency. If at any time again we feel that our symptoms become worse, it's always consult with a mental health professional. Never, never hesitate. We don't want anyone to suffer alone. Thank you, dear Ryan. Thank you. I think we could just covered all of that. You're muted, dear Ryan. You're mute.
Thank you, Katy. Thank you so much. So I'm going to jump in back here. So thank you very much for all the strategies. And I can tell you that the victims that we worked with went through a lot of that trauma and a lot of the emotions, everything from denial to depression. And you also have to figure family aspects as well, right? In both of our situations, the families were hugely impacted. So it wasn't just the individual that was a victim here, it was the entire family that was victimized in both of the scams that I mentioned earlier, the 1.4 million and the $280,000 scam that we were investigating. Very, very challenging for the entire family. And then both of those families are still going through a lot of trauma, unfortunately. So I think everybody needs to be slowed down a little bit when it comes to these risks. Here are a few red flags to watch for when it comes to these scams. Pressure is the biggest one. Criminals or scammers will often put pressure on victims into making quick decisions, whether that's sending money or giving access to your data or computer, right? Some of them ask for access to your computer. They want to do that right now. And I'd like everybody to take a minute to fully assess the situation before making a decision. It's interesting as well, those two scams that I mentioned earlier, neither of those victims in that situation told anybody what was going on. They didn't tell anybody about the investments or anything until it was too late, because those victims were the scammers were telling them, don't tell anybody about this and whatnot, and they were following those instructions. Another one is money up front. Particularly in the case of an investment scam, or as I mentioned, an investigation into an investment scam. Oftentimes it's the same group that's coming back and they're now investigating the original scam, but they were the ones that did it. So be very wary of being asked to send any money up front, especially those investment scams. Talk to somebody. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Promises of doubling, tripling, or quadruple your money in 6 months is likely unbelievable. And it is absolutely such a high level of return so quickly isn't realistic and should definitely be questioned. A lot of times the scammers will want you to use encrypted apps, such as chat apps or emails, encrypted emails, in order to do business. And emails, normal emails and written forms of communication are more reliable. However, they want to sort of hide their tracks, right? So they're going to get you to use WhatsApp because it's fully encrypted or whatnot. It's a little bit harder for investigators to investigate that. Asking for remote access into your computer. This is a big one. There are a few instances where somebody might need remote access into your computer. Think of your service provider or whatnot. If you call Rogers or Bell, they might want to log in and you're allowing them into your computer. I would still be very careful and watch what they're doing. But be very, very cautious about if you're dealing with any sort of investment or whatnot, about allowing anybody into your computer. If you have any questions about that, please reach out or call a computer store or whatnot, right? You have to be very, very careful. The other thing that happens is many of us have this Pavlovian response when it comes to getting emails or getting text messages. The second that we hear a ping from our phone or we see an email pop up on our screen, we instantly want to open it. and we instantly want to start communicating with that person. It's just built into our DNA. I think we want to, jump into things. Criminals know this. And they know that if they add more pressure, again, there's this pressure by using the words urgent, immediately, or crucial, you're more likely not only to open up an email or a text message, but potentially an attachment or responding to orders, especially if it's pretending to be coming from your CEO or somebody within your organization. There are lots of different virtual attacks out there, but I want to talk about the three that we are starting to see a lot more. Obviously, phishing attacks, that's via email. We've seen these attacks for years and years and years. And you can think going all the way back to, the Nigerian prince scams where you could get $52 million. Somebody was leaving the country and you just had to hold it for them and they would give you 15% of it or whatnot. We saw those emails years and years and years ago. However, this continues, right? Phishing emails we get on a daily basis. We are deploying better tools, both in our business and personally, to help with this, right? So that's really stopping a lot of the attacks. The other one is smishing, and that's via text message. I'm now receiving, fake text messages from other banks that I don't bank with. You need to log in with your credentials or whatnot. So be very careful about links that are sent or instructions that are sent via text message. That's the next thing that people are moving to. And then vishing, that's voice. So people can now use our voice to mimic other people, right? We used to just get calls and people would pretend to be somebody else. But now with the use of AI, people can actually take our voice, especially if we do presentations like this. And I'll show you an example of when I did it myself and use that against us. So we are starting to see a lot of vishing, voice attacks with people pretending to be the CEO of an organization, or we're seeing parents or grandparents getting scammed. You can Google it in the news. There was a scam going around a little while ago where a mother received a phone call from her daughter, and it was, the attackers were saying that her daughter had been kidnapped, and she could hear her daughter crying in the background and saying some words in the background as the attackers were giving the mother instructions. And unfortunately, she followed those instructions and fell victim to the attack, and her daughter was never even kidnapped, right? So people are starting to use our voice a little bit. So never act on suspicious calls. If a friend or a family member calls you asking for money, right, I would say hang up and call them back with a trusted number that you know. People can spoof phone numbers as well, so we have to be very cautious around that. Be aware of the information we share online, especially, if we're following links within an email, a text message, or, if somebody is telling us to go somewhere verbally as well. When in doubt, reach out. Contact a friend or a family member directly to verify any suspicious calls or emails or text messages. Ask people. And it's incredible the amount of people that don't, right? They fall victim to these. They don't tell anybody, maybe embarrassment or whatnot, but they don't mention it to a single person. So here's a pro tip for you, especially for the voice attacks that we're starting to see a little bit more of, where people are pretending to be kidnapped or whatnot. Set up a secret word or phrase for your loved ones. I do this with my kids. And, if you do get a phone call of somebody pretending to be your children or a family member, ask them that secret word, or ask them something that only they would know. That's not really public knowledge, right? And if they can't give that to you, then something fishy is going on. Soon, we're going to see video attacks. And if any of you have heard of something called deep fakes, those are fake videos that are out there. You can see them about celebrities and whatnot, and they are getting harder and harder to spot. The AI technology is becoming so strong. Before, you could spot them quite easily, but now it's really challenging. I did a conference a few weeks ago with a friend of mine who is an AI specialist, and she was showing a video of a gentleman speaking in English, and then with the use of an AI tool, he all of a sudden was speaking in Italian and in French, and the AI changed the whole video of his mouth as well as he was speaking. So it was quite incredible. So basically, the moral of the story here is we're going to have to start to be very careful about what we read, right, by email or by text message, what we hear and what we see, right? It's best to verify these things. I mentioned AI and grabbing our voice. And I mentioned that conference I did a little while ago. So I took samples of my voice from other presentations that are online. I've done other presentations for U of T and others out there. And I took different samples and I fed it into an AI tool, a free one. It took about 2 minutes. And at the beginning of the presentation, I just walked up on screen and I played this video and pretended to talk. So I'll play a little bit of it, all of it for you.
Good afternoon, a CFE. Welcome to our keynote talk on artificial intelligence and how it will impact our daily lives and investigations. While artificial intelligence is a term we see almost daily in
So there you go. I'm not going to play the entire thing, but you get the point. It does kind of sound like me. I've got a cold right now, so maybe not identically like me, but it does. And that was pretty scary that within 5 minutes of grabbing samples online, I was able to take my voice, plug it into a free tool. Okay, there's some little things there. You might sound a little robotic, but with a paid tool, that's going to be a lot smoother. And here's what people can do with that. The other challenge that I'm seeing is a lot of times we now use our voice to authenticate ourselves, especially at our banks. Our banks want us to do this. I know my bank, I call up and they say, next time you can use your voice to verify yourself. And I never choose that because this is why.
Welcome to Lloyds Bank. So we can get you to the right place. In your own words, please say the reason for your call.
Check my balance.
Okay. Please say or key in your date of birth. Please say, my voice is my password.
My voice is my password.
Thank you. Here a balance.
So there you go. I'm not going to play the entire video there, but you can see that an AI tool was able to, to get somebody into the bank, right? So quite scary. There's a few things that most of these attacks, be it email or texting or voice or whatnot, there's a few things that they want us to do most of the time. The first one is they want to obtain your PII, which is your personal identifying information. That could be your date of birth, as we just saw, somebody needed that date of birth to type into the banking application, or other things, your home address, your middle name, all sorts of other things make up your personal identifying information. This can be used for a variety of things, including identity theft and other fraudulent crimes, like we just saw on that example there. The other one that they want us to do is click an attachment. And the largest situation here is ransomware, right? A lot of attachments can come with malware or other nasties baked into them, and we don't want to click on those. So we do have to be very careful about when we receive an attachment from somebody that it's legitimate, right? And we can walk through how to do that. So we have to be very careful about attachments, clicking on them. And the last one is clicking on a link to a website. And that is so they can gather your credentials. And people can spoof websites very, very easily. They can spoof the Google login. They can spoof Office 365 logins. And here you go, you enter your credentials and they've got those. Now, what this can allow people to do is they can allow you into obviously that account. If it's your Google account, they've got that information. But oftentimes we are creatures of habit. And we use the same password and the same, business email or personal email. We use it a variety of other places. So they will go and they'll check a whole bunch of other places and try those same credentials. So we have to be careful about that. So hint, hint, don't use the same credentials across a bunch of your accounts. So if I said to you that there was 4 things that you could quickly do to scan an email, take you 10 seconds or 5 seconds, would you do that? Probably. Most people do. So the timing of an email or the timing of a text message or a voice call or whatnot, does the timing make sense, right? Is somebody in your business going to be emailing you with a invoice or receipt, or somebody at home? Are they going to be emailing you with something? So does the timing make sense? What is the intent? If it is one of those 3 things that I just mentioned, I want you to slow down a little bit and verify things a little bit more, right? Clicking on a website or entering in your credentials or whatnot. Look at the person who it's to and who it's from. Sometimes I'll see just hello and it doesn't have my name in it. That looks a little strange, right? Or it says at the top that it's Susan and at the bottom it says it is Bob. Okay, that looks a little strange as well. So we have to look at that a little bit carefully. There's other ways as well within emails to hover over the email addresses. If all you see is a name, hover over it with your mouse. It might take you and show you the full email address. And sometimes they look very, very odd, especially coming from some of these scam websites. And the content. Are there spelling mistakes and grammatical errors in the email? Sure, we get those all the time, especially in our business. We're rushing, we send emails back and forth. But does the content of the email make sense? Would, at your business, would a CFO be emailing you with a receipt? At your house, would somebody be emailing you with a receipt attached? Probably not. So do those 4 things. You can scan the email very, very quickly and, slow down a little bit if any of them seem off. So how are these, criminals or scammers getting our information to scam us? What are they doing? Well, a lot of them are using social engineering, and they're looking out on the web. We love putting information out there about ourselves, right? From X, previously known as Twitter, to Meta, previously known as Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. All these different places are a repository of information that scammers can go and look up information about us to then customize those attacks against us, customize those emails or those text messages. And we're like, whoa, wait a minute, this actually does sound like it's coming from a friend. Or in the voice situation, they might go and look up your dog's name on Meta. Okay, so they've got that information around you, about you. So we have to be a little bit careful about what we share online as well. How are you being targeted as well? Reused credentials. This is a great site, and I highly recommend that you go and check it out at some point. It is a site that gathers breached credentials. So for example, I'll go back and I'll use LinkedIn. It was on the last page. If LinkedIn was breached and you had your email address and a password in there, potentially that information might get stolen. Right. So attackers will take this, they'll put it out on the deep and dark web, and this site will actually gather that and put it on the surface web for you that you can go and take a look at. It's a great tool to see if your email accounts have ever been involved in a breach. Now, the nice thing about this tool is it also shows you your password if it's in plain text, which basically means that the organization that you were using, Instagram or LinkedIn in this example, might not have been encrypting your password. If they weren't, it might be here in plain text for the world to see. I think it's about $5, this tool, for 7 days worth of usage. And what I recommend everybody to do is go and buy that. Buy the $5, type into it all your email addresses, your family's email addresses. Just spend an hour typing them all in, and it'll show you every single time it's been involved in a breach. And if you're still using any of the passwords that it says, you need to go and change them right away because they are available for the entire world to see, unfortunately. So I've had many clients who we found information about them on this website. We are creatures of habit when it comes to our passwords, unfortunately, and we don't like our passwords to be complex. But we also think that we are very sneaky by changing the A's to the @ symbols and the zeros to, or the O's to zeros and whatnot. Well, we're not. We're not at all being sneaky there. Criminals know this, and the tools that criminals know to try to break into passwords will account for that as well. But again, we are creatures of habit, and we will change from January 22 to January 23, or we'll change the month or whatnot. We'll just change the end a little bit. And there's that pattern there that moves along as well. So if attackers can get any of your passwords, they'll try different combinations of them as well. I always recommend that people use a password manager for all their passwords. This is an example of one that I use. There's lots of them out there. Just go and Google different password managers. But basically, it is an online repository where you can generate passwords for all of your accounts, and it helps you log into them automatically and enters in all your credentials. I actually like them. I actually find it speeds things up a little bit. And you can see an example here of creating a 50 character, uppercase, lowercase, special characters here. I would never remember this. And I don't remember most of my passwords. I think I have about 150 passwords in my password manager. I don't know probably 140 of them. Now, people are always concerned about putting all their passwords into one location and one, repository. Yes, there always is a risk. There's a risk in everything. There's a risk in every single software that we run in our computers, and there's always risks. So, but to me, the risk of, using a password manager is way less than reusing passwords across multiple platforms because you want to just remember 1 or 2 passwords to use. So that is a much, much higher risk. So, these aren't expensive as well. They're very inexpensive to use. Two-factor authentication is another one. I'm sure a lot of you are already using that, where you get a little text message on your phone, or you have to use a two-factor authenticator application, such as Google Authenticator, and you're getting a special code that you type in. Basically, what's happening here is if an attacker was able to get your email address and your password, and they tried to log into an account, if you had two-factor set up, it would send your phone that two-factor code. Okay, so it's just a third layer, typing in your credentials, I guess, is maybe one, and this is the second one of security, right? And it really does help a lot from stopping people from getting into your accounts. This is a great website. It goes into all the different places that offer two-factor authentication, and it'll take you to their site and show you how to set it up. So I highly recommend everywhere you can enable two-factor authentication. Prevention. We talked a little bit about slowing down. Take a minute, right? No legitimate professional or organization is going to pressure you to make a decision or a payment immediately. And if they do, be cautious and get a second opinion if you can about these scams. Again, I've mentioned this before. Neither of the parties that I was dealing with even just went to talk to somebody about these investments and said, this is what's going on. Should we move ahead with it? Does it sound weird? Go and get a second opinion. Do your due diligence. Sometimes even a simple Google search can help you determine if a would-be scammer's claims are factual or fake. Is the company you're being pressured to invest in, is it even real? Can you verify the identity of the person you've been chatting with online? Research this kind of information as much as you can before sending anybody money. In two of the two samples that I showed you, examples I showed you earlier, if the victims there would have done a little bit of due diligence and looked online about these scams, they likely would have seen a lot of information that would have warned them. A lot of the sites were warning people. Speak with a financial advisor or somebody you trust, especially if you're wondering about a financial move, especially for some of these investment scams, or I mentioned the romance scam that turned into an investment scam. It doesn't hurt to seek the advice of a professional. Similarly, like I mentioned, speak with family members to get their opinion. Sometimes an extra set of eyes on the situation can allow you to see it in a new light. And I talked earlier about this one, setting up a family password that can be used in the days of AI, voice, and video cloning, which is coming soon. It'll be helpful to have a word or a phrase that your family knows to help you determine if you're speaking to them or if you're speaking to a scammer. The other thing you should be doing is choosing a different route. If you get an email or a text message or a voice message telling you to do something, choose the route that you know is safe. For example, if you get an email or text message from Netflix, let me pick on Netflix here, saying that your account is down, your payment didn't go through, please click here to log into your account to make sure everything's fine. Don't follow the link, right? Go to your computer, go log into your Netflix or go onto your television, turn it on. Chances are it's working just fine, or go to the website and see, but don't follow the route that these scammers want you to take. Old school, pick up the phone and call. It's often best to get confirmation before, like I mentioned, clicking on a suspicious attachment or a file that you're not expecting. And this is especially important before making any sort of money transfer. We had another client this week that we're working with that received some goods, and then they got an invoice from the vendor. They do a lot of work with this vendor, so they received goods first. And then they got a weird email from the vendor saying, we switched our wire information. Can you please send the wire to this new information? So they did. And it was an email coming from the CFO of the company that they were just communicating with that same day. So they sent the money to a bank. I think it was in Hong Kong or somewhere like that. It seemed a little strange. And their vendor called them 3 days later and said, we haven't got the funds. Where are they? Oh, we sent them. And they looked into it, and it was a complete scam. Attackers had been able to get access to the company's email environment and jumped into the conversation and quickly pivoted the money to be sent. So in that sort of situation, I think their spidey sense, so to speak, was going off, because they were like, why are they switching this vendor? We've been the same wire information for years and years and years. Pick up the phone, call somebody. It's better to do that. Okay, with that, I'd really like to thank you for your time. Dr. Kamkar, it's been a pleasure to present with you once again. And we do have some time now for questions. there's both of our information, including different websites where I know Dr. Kamkar has lots of information online, and I try to put some stuff up online as well. Happy to connect on different social platforms as well. Dr. Kamkar, any final comments before we go to questions?
I'm all good. Thank you so much, dear Ryan. And as Ryan just mentioned, you know where to find us. So we're always happy to help.
Okay. Thank you for that. So it looks like we've got some questions in the Q&A. So we'll start with answering some of those. Does responding to a WhatsApp message open you up to scams, or is it merely clicking links or attachments? Well, it really depends, right? So when you respond to a message, and I know a lot of the scams that I talked about, they just started with that response, right? And that's how the attackers then can sort of hook you a little bit and start talking to you. Obviously, clicking on links and attachments, even within WhatsApp, is not a very, very good thing to do. But even be careful. If you're talking to somebody and it seems a little off, I would slow down a little bit. Okay. This one's a long one. Let me go to the next one. What's your opinion on any breach regarding large corporations, which individuals get caught in this situation? Chapters, Indigo, etc. They're offering free access to Equifax and TransUnion. And I've inquired that there have been problems with the types of agencies. Where do we go from here? Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of these organizations, when they are breached, they are going to offer you credit, security, right? And credit monitoring, which again, I think is a very good thing to do. I think you should be checking your credit anyways. I normally go and will check my credit twice a year, just to see what's on there and see if there's anybody looking for credit on my accounts. So I do that automatically. Now these, automatic ones, they'll do it continuously. So, yes, there's been some problems with some of these agencies over the years. So where do you go from there? I think you do a lot of the things that we talked about today, right? Obviously, if your information has been breached and it's already out there in the wild, it's very hard to get it back. Very, very challenging. But locking down your privacy and locking down your accounts and everything we talked about today will help to make sure that you're not falling victim to the future. Okay, two-factor authentication. It seems like folks have all the information on their cell phones. Where is it there? Likely most people have no protection on their cell phone, smartphone. Is it true criminals can access your smartphone even standing near your phone? It really depends. Thank you, Eric, for that. It really depends on your phone. It's interesting. I was doing another presentation earlier yesterday, and I was talking about mobile malware that goes on phones. For the most part, iPhones are quite secure. They do control a lot of the App Store and the App Store on there. So there is, however, I was seeing it on LinkedIn today, there is a new feature in iPhones that allow you to put phones together and it can swap information. Now, I do think you need to approve that. I don't think it'll do it automatically, but I told my kids, go and turn it off. Right. There's probably no need for you to be tapping your phone against somebody and sharing information. So happy to help. Yeah, I'm sure you could Google that and find out where it is. It's in the settings and whatnot. So it really depends. Yes, you can get malware on your phones. However, phones are a little bit, less susceptible to it, especially iPhones, than computers. Okay. Here's another one. When you help clients in the aftermath of experiencing a scam, do you typically help them immediately after or a while after? Well, the first part of that is really depends. It depends on when they come to us. Sometimes these victims come to us mid-scam. They've been scammed and they're still communicating with the parties. So we'll jump in and we'll start doing an investigation and we'll start communicating with some of these parties or sending them, trying to trace where in the world they are. Now, a lot of these attackers and scammers are very, very good at hiding their tracks. So they use a lot of methods to do that. I'm wondering if the assistance when helping them through the immediate action would differ when helping them through weeks and months later. Yes, absolutely. If we're helping somebody long after the fact, the attackers are long gone. It does differ a little bit because we're not as actively trying to gather information about the attackers. We're now looking at it proactively and we're looking or reactively and we're looking at it later on. Okay, what else do we got here? We've got a few more minutes here. Are Google accounts a good password manager? I don't like using my browser if that's what you're referring to here, to save my passwords. I like to have all my passwords in one password manager. That's what I like to do. So I normally don't save anything in, like, when it pops up on the screen. If you type something in, we can save your credit card or, save your information in your browser. I'm not a big fan of doing that. So I'd rather use a password manager. Katy, this one might be for you. Probably it might be the last question here. Do you have any suggestions for helping seniors who have memory issues protecting themselves from scams?
I think that here it will be very helpful for them to be surrounded by very constructive and quality support and resources around them, in terms of ensuring, of course, that they have the communications and the support and everything needed. But in terms of how the family and the close friends and the trusted ones can help them, but to ensure that minimizing the risk that it could be present. So I think that here there are two levels. First of all, in terms of, yes, the psychological support, but then here they would need, in terms of some of your very key technical support, Ryan, that the family in those cases would need to have to help their loved ones, so that their loved ones is protected in those cases. So what would be, let's say, the typical measures that the people would use, but in addition here in this case, are there even any additional measures that they can use so that they do not feel as helpless and they are further protected? Because it's also very important that whenever they are home, that they feel safe and secure. We all know, we all want to be home and we want to feel safe and secure, and picking up the phone or using any of our equipment that allow us to communicate with ourselves and to communicate with the world, but to ensure that we have our safety here. So yes, from a psychological and medical point of view, we want to ensure that, but definitely in that case, I would say to the family also to reaching out, such as here, dear Ryan, key expertise to make sure here there is an added protection, because we all know the greater our vulnerability, then also we are even more susceptible, considering that this is something that no one is immune. It can happen to really anyone, and that is why we are having this conversation.
Thank you so much. There's our information again. We are out of time, unfortunately. It's been a pleasure being here today. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to Dr. Kamkar or myself. Be happy to answer any of your questions. And with that, Ben, I'd like to thank everybody again. Thank you again, Dr. Kamkar. It's been a pleasure. And thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you, Ryan and Dr. Kamkar. On behalf of U of T Mississauga, I'd like to thank you both for your presentation and responses to those questions from our alumni audience. To our audience, I know we received a lot of questions today. Apologies if we weren't able to get to all of them. Unfortunately, there's a lot of you out there, and this is a hot topic. Hopefully you were able to take down some of the information, and we'll be able to reach out to Ryan or Katy on your own if needed. Also, we will be forwarding a recording of this session to all of you once we have an opportunity to put some subtitles below it. So you'll be getting that in your inbox the next week. Also, after this webinar ends, you're going to have the option to take a post-event survey. And we hope you'll take a couple of minutes to complete it, as your feedback is helpful for planning future events. Everyone who registered for today's event, thank you so much for coming. We hope to see you again at another UTM alumni event in future. Thanks, Ryan and Katy.